This is the season 2 recap of Ginny and Georgia. My name is Brooke Richmond. I am a licensed marriage and family therapist. Let's dive in. Okay, season 2, a lot happened. Let's talk about it. So, one of the first things I want to dive into is narcissistic personality disorder. Okay, I want to dive into that first because I feel like we're seeing a lot of different behaviors from Georgia. We might be a little confused, we might feel like we know, and I just want to say I am not here to diagnose anyone, but I do want to provide information. I want to paint the picture for what it looks like to have a personality disorder. Okay, so clinically, these are the behaviors that, or this is like the language. This is the clinical language for the behaviors that are associated with someone who has a narcissistic personality disorder. Okay, so one of the behaviors is called interpersonally exploitative. So this is when someone takes advantage of the people around them to achieve their own goals or to, carry out a certain agenda. We see that with Georgia, most definitely. When do we see that? We see in this particular season. In this particular season, we see that when with Cynthia. Cynthia's husband is dying. He's on hospice, and Georgia goes out of her way to use Cynthia to try to get into the neighborhood club. Okay, Cynthia is in a very vulnerable place. She's losing her husband. She's not well. She's not mentally well. But here we have, Georgia coming to her house and trying to basically work her to see if she can vouch for her to be in a neighborhood club. Again, this is, a behavior of a narcissist where they want to get what they want by any means necessary. And Georgia really wanted to be in the neighborhood club for, status and to feel good about herself, which is also a part of being a narcissist. And she preys on Cynthia ultimately. That's one way that, she went about being exploitative or taking advantage of someone. I feel like we see this with Paul throughout the entire season. Poor Paul. Poor thing. We see this with him. Like, she just takes full advantage of him. He doesn't even really know who she is until the end of the season. And even then, she didn't tell him everything. But I think she takes advantage of his role, of his status. He's the mayor. And he has access to certain things that she normally probably would not have access to if they weren't together. And then we also see this with her stealing the book that is a part of the neighborhood club, if I'm remembering correctly. She steals this book, places it in Cynthia's son's bag, Zach, his backpack. Cynthia, finds it, let Georgia, facilitate that whole process, and then she returns it, and now she's automatically in the neighborhood club. So one thing we do see with Georgia is she is going to make stuff happen by any means necessary. If she wants it, she's going to get it, and she's not taking no for an answer, and she doesn't care who she hurts, who she steps on in the process. That is a behavior of a narcissist. We also see that with narcissists, they also lack empathy, okay? And they're unwilling to recognize or identify with the feelings and needs of others. And we definitely see this throughout the season. I feel like she has moments where she might have some empathy, but generally, Georgia lacks empathy, which is a behavior of someone who has narcissistic personality disorder. Where do we see her lack empathy? Okay, I'm looking at my notes, y'all. So when Ginny comes back from her dad's house, this is the very beginning of the season, she comes back from her dad's house. It's clear that she's upset, she's scared, she's confused. She's angry, right? She's angry with Georgia. She just found out that Georgia killed her stepdad, who she had some kind of an attachment to, but she's also just finding out her mom is a murderer. So that's scary. And when she came back to her mom's house from her dad's, Georgia just made it all about her. She made it about, she it was hard for her to acknowledge and recognize that Ginny was upset about something, that she was upset with her about something. And she made it about her and how she felt about the kids running away. Why did you guys want to be with your dad? And it left no space for Ginny to have her own feelings, to feel safe. Ultimately, I don't think she felt genuinely safe being back at home, since Georgia was making everything about her, right? We also see, let me see here. Austin was upset with Georgia for not mailing the letters, right? Now we find out later why she did what she did, but Austin, he's so young, he's a baby, he doesn't understand all of that. And when he asked her, Mom, why did you do that? Why didn't you mail my letters, or why did you lie to me about it? She never acknowledges his feelings, his hurt. She just apologizes. And he's so young, so of course he's going to be he's gonna receive that. He's gonna be impressed by that. But that's not really acknowledging what he's going through. He was betrayed. He felt betrayed. He was upset with her, and she never acknowledged that. Even when they came back from Zion's house and he didn't want to talk to her, she started to be extra playful with him and making it seem like this was a game that they were playing. And then eventually he stopped being mad at her, because that's his mom and he wants to be loved by his mom, and that's completely understandable. But we see that was a behavior of a narcissist, to lack empathy and to not recognize the feelings of others and what they need as well. And I think both of them needed, when they came back to their mom's house from Zion's house, they needed to have a conversation. They needed to feel safe. They needed to feel like they were going to get answers. And that didn't happen until way later. But even then, it was still, there was still a lot of questions. There were still a lot of question marks, right? Okay. So that is definitely one of the behaviors of a narcissist. And, I also made a note that the lack of empathy from Georgia as their mother, it just adds to the hurt. It adds to the pain. It adds to the trauma of, all of the uncertainty. That can just feel very anxiety provoking. That can be very anxiety provoking, to just not know and not be sure. And with Georgia not acknowledging that and how that is making the kids feel, it can add to their hurt and their pain. And, that leads to the relationship, again, just not feeling safe. There's no trust between the parent and the child. Okay. So that, take that into consideration when we think about personality disorders, but also when you just think about parent-child relationships as a whole, there has to be a sense of safety and trust within the relationship. Okay, so let me see. Let's go to the next behavior. Okay, let me look at my notes. Some of the other behaviors of a narcissist, they have to feel special or high status. They have a grandiose sense of self-importance. We definitely see that with Georgia, just even how she carries herself. You see how my body language started to change as I'm talking about her. She loves feeling important. She loves the attention. She loves, feeling like she is this most amazing gal, right? This gal. And that's a part of the narcissistic personality disorder. We see that something else, that is another behavior that is attached to narcissistic personality disorder, is being envious of other people, okay? Or believing that other people are envious of you. And I feel like we do see that with Georgia. I feel like Georgia struggles with envy towards Ginny. Ginny is she's getting more settled in their town. She has friends. She has a guy that she likes. She's having normal, healthy teenage experiences that Georgia didn't get. She didn't get to have those experiences because of her trauma and having to run away and then getting pregnant, and she had to grow up really, really fast. I think she does want to see Ginny happy, but as long as Ginny's happiness revolves around Georgia, she's good. But now that Ginny, I'm sorry, all the names, but now that Ginny is creating her own life and starting to develop her own identity outside of Georgia, it appears that, you know, Georgia feels that she feels threatened by that she is envious of that. And I think she even, you know, said something. I think Ginny even said something to Georgia about that, like, you're jealous. Like, you know, there have been moments where Georgia, you know, tried to intervene and not respect Ginny's boundaries, right? She didn't respect Ginny's boundaries when it came to certain experiences and different situations that was happening. And, you know, and I believe that was because of how envious she was of Ginny and her new life. So those are the main behaviors of narcissistic personality disorder. And again, I'm not here to diagnose anyone. I promise I'm not. But we see a lot of problematic behaviors from Georgia, a lot of toxic behaviors, and some of them do align with narcissistic personality disorder. So that was one thing I wanted to touch on that I definitely was peeping during season 2. The other thing I wanted to talk about was I love that the show is going deeper into anxiety and self-harming behaviors, right? So this is being talked about more and explored more as Ginny has now started therapy, which you know I love. I love that Zion put her in therapy after she told him that she burned herself, that she is engaging in self-harming behaviors. Well, we would call this non-suicidal self-harming behaviors. And she did mention that she's not doing it to harm herself in a permanent way, like she doesn't want to die or anything. She just uses it to cope with her stress, her anxiety, her triggers. And Zion, you know, went ahead and put her in therapy, which is beautiful. I love that. I love that he did that. I love that we see Ginny having a panic attack with Zion, right? And I loved his response. His response was great, like helping her breathe and just like being there with her, being present with her during her panic attack was great. And that was also teaching her a coping skill, like, okay, just breathe through it. It's okay. And she was able to, you know, to come back from that. But, you know, with Ginny, we're seeing that she's having all of this anxiety because she's so stressed out. She's holding everything in. She can't really talk about what's going on. She's afraid to talk to Zion about what she knows. She can't really talk to her friends about it. She's opening up a little bit to Marcus, but at the end of the day, she's really holding everything in, and George is not leaving any space for her to be expressive and open about what she's dealing with. And so then that's when we see her resort to burning herself, and that's how she is coping. But I love that she's in therapy again, and I love that the therapist is helping her develop healthier coping strategies. So she has her journaling, which is great. I love journaling. I am personally a journaler myself, and it is a great way to get out your emotions, your feelings, your thoughts. And I love that she even, you know, tweaked it to make it better for her, or make it more relatable for her, or more useful for her, because she started writing poetry instead of just like journaling, like just writing, I guess to a imaginary person. She started writing poetry in her therapy journal, and I think that's great. That's actually something that I would encourage anyone to do. Like, use a coping skill that you feel like is truly authentic to you, like that you feel like you truly resonate with, that you feel like it's truly going to be helpful. If it's not helpful for you to just sit and journal your thoughts, then you're most likely not going to do it. But we know that she enjoys poetry. We know that Zion also recites poetry, so that felt authentic to her, and she can still express her feelings, her thoughts through poetry. So it's still a way for her to release, which is excellent. So I loved that. And then we also see that the therapist, we see that she recommends Ginny wear the rubber band on her wrist. So every time she's feeling stressed, or every time she's triggered by something, specifically with Georgia, her mom, she pulls the rubber band instead of burning, which is great, because we don't want anyone to harm themselves, but we especially don't want kids harming themselves. That it's just so dangerous to use anything like that to harm yourself, and it's scary, right? So I think this is great. Ginny is developing healthier coping strategies, which is beautiful. Okay, so that's how we're seeing Ginny's anxiety show up. I think she's managing. She's trying to get through it. She's just carrying so much. There's anger, there's confusion, there's disappointment, fear, mistrust, the trauma of moving around. When there's lack of stability, that can be very traumatic. We see that she's, smoking weed more. She's just completely shut down. So yes, if you are dealing with all of those things and you're harboring all of those feelings and experiences, you don't really have a safe space to let that stuff out. Yeah, I think anyone would be walking around with anxiety. So I'm really happy that Ginny is in therapy, and she's working through these different things, right? Now, I also want to touch on, so we see anxiety in teens, right, with Ginny, and then we also see anxiety and stress and trauma in young children. So I want to talk about Austin, right? So we see that Austin, how does he deal with his stuff? He just stops talking altogether. He stops talking when he's upset. He stops talking when he's anxious. Okay, look, he goes straight mute. Look around, everybody on mute. That's Austin, right? And it just breaks my heart, that he just, that's what he resorts to. That's his way of feeling safe, just not talking at all. And why does this happen with young children? And it's because they haven't developed the tools and the skills to express themselves or articulate themselves in a way that they understand, one, but also for adults to understand. So sometimes children will just stop talking, like Austin, or we see some children have more behaviors come out, more problematic behaviors that come out. So they might start fighting at school, they might start bullying, teasing other kids. They might become more defiant, not wanting to follow the rules, right? We also see that Austin, yes, he goes mute, but it was mentioned in season 1 that he wets the bed. That is also a behavior that is related to anxiety. Like that's a symptom of anxiety, is in children, bedwetting. You stop talking, right? And then for some other children, there might be more behaviors such as like just aggressive behaviors, again, like I mentioned, the teasing, the bullying, fighting at school. So that's just something to keep in mind and be aware of if you have children of your own, or if you know children, if you work with children. If you're starting to see more problematic behaviors such as what I mentioned, there might be a mental health issue there. So there might be some anxiety, some depression, some type of trauma that they're experiencing, some of those things might be going on. So yeah, I wanted to make sure I touched on that because I love that the show is showing how anxiety can showing how anxiety can show up in different developmental ages and in different ages and stages for people. So we see the teen and how Ginny has anxiety and how that's showing up for her. And then we see anxiety and how that's showing up for Austin, who is significantly younger, who's a child. Okay, let's dive into just some general, like, pivotal moments during this season. So the first one of the most, like, I feel like was this is a great moment was Georgia finding out that Ginny was burning herself. Whoo, I was nervous. I don't know about you, but I was nervous because we know Georgia's track record. We know that she generally makes everything about her, that she, tends to focus on her feelings and how things are impacting her. Whatever is going on in Georgia's world, that's what she's focused on. And this is a pivotal moment because she really focuses on Ginny, and she's really concerned. Like Ginny says, she's mom activated. I loved that. She just really holds space for Ginny. She provides a safe space for Ginny to share what's going on. I even love that she said something along the lines of, like, give me all of that pain, let me have your pain. Don't, basically don't do this to yourself. Let me be the one that hurts for you. Let me be the one that experiences all this pain that you're going through. And I think that was just so necessary. We needed to see that from Georgia with a situation like that because, finding out your child is burning themselves is hard. That is scary. And we saw Zion's reaction. He was very attentive and he was very supportive and he provided a safe space for Ginny. But I was genuinely nervous that Georgia would be able to do the same, but she did. And I want to give her props for that. And I think that also shows that Georgia is capable. She is capable of having these beautiful mom moments with Ginny, but we know just certain things just get in the way. But we want to give her props when she has those beautiful moments. So thank you, Georgia. Another a pivotal moment, and I was getting a little nervous about this too, was the family therapy session. So when Georgia shows up at the school, now that wasn't cool. She showed up at Ginny's school to take her to therapy. Ginny's like, hold up, wait a minute. My dad usually takes me to therapy. And, Georgia kind of, elbows her way into Ginny's therapy sessions, which was not cool, which is the boundary issue that, we see with Georgia in season 1 and definitely throughout season 2. Again, a behavior of someone who has a narcissistic personality disorder. They do not respect boundaries. But I think that we see a shift. We see a shift with Georgia and Ginny, during the therapy session. One, we see Ginny is really using her voice. She's really expressing herself to Georgia. She's trying to help Georgia understand her experiences and, just what she's been going through. Now, it was hard for Georgia to take accountability. It was hard for Georgia to acknowledge what Ginny was feeling, to recognize what Ginny was feeling. It was hard for her. She struggled with that. And she kept bringing everything back to her and what she's done for Ginny and everything she's sacrificed for Ginny. And Ginny told her, like, you know what, you have done a lot for me. Yes, I understand that it has been hard, but I do want you to understand how certain things that you do and your choices impact me and how they make me feel. And I think the therapist did a great job in highlighting what the overall need was, and that was for both of them to feel understood. I loved that. So shout out to the therapist on that. That was great. I think we also see in the family therapy session, we see some vulnerability from Georgia. She's, team, I gotta be strong, can't show emotion. Even Ginny mentioned, she avoids conflict. But what I think we see some softness from Georgia, and Ginny needed that. She needed to see that side of her mom. And Georgia even says later when they got home that she feels like Ginny's superpower is her vulnerability. And that is major. That is huge for Georgia to say, period, for her character, because she has had to be strong. She has had to be a fighter, and she's basically had to be in survival mode. And so there's no time, there's no space for vulnerability, for breaking down and things like that. You have to be strong to get through some of the things that Georgia has been through. But she doesn't have to live like that. And I think she gave Ginny permission to not have to live like that. And she acknowledged that that is actually something that is beautiful about Ginny. And in my personal opinion, we do need to exercise vulnerability. I think that is a strength. Transparency, vulnerability, that is a strength, because at the end of the day, we all got something going on and we all need each other. So shout out to Georgia on that. Now, I do want to say that when they got home from the therapy session, I was like, oh Lord, they drinking in the car. But you know what? That is actually pretty common. I have worked with families, clients, children, adults, where they're in session and they have these great sessions. They are, making progress. There was good conversation, and they get home and they fall back into some of those old behaviors, those old patterns. So I say all that to say it takes time. It takes time to make those changes, to move forward, to basically, create a new norm. And, their relationship has been extremely enmeshed. We see poor boundaries, on behalf of Georgia when it comes to Ginny, and them drinking in the car was definitely not good. But that was real, yes, they had this great session and they're trying to move forward and again, understand one another. But that doesn't mean that everything is just going to change and just, magically be better overnight. So that is, just something something that I just wanted to highlight. Okay, another pivotal moment is now Georgia has the season ends with Georgia being arrested at her wedding. Whoa. And this comes after she kills Cynthia's husband, who was already on hospice. And the reason why I feel like this is a pivotal moment, because when that season ended, it just made me think about everything, just that could happen later that would, impact the kids. If Georgia's is in jail, now the kids are going to have to stay with Paul. That's another change. And then, we got to make sure Zion is super involved, which we know he will, because he's already been so involved with Ginny and Austin, which is really, really sweet. And then, but I also thought about Austin because he saw Georgia kill Cynthia's husband, number one. Number two, he's clearly very attached to his mom, which most children are, right? And one of the thoughts that I had when Georgia got arrested and Austin runs after the police car, it made me think about when I was working with children, when I was working with kids who were in the foster care system. It did not matter what their parent did to them. It didn't matter how abusive they were, whatever choices they made that landed, the child in foster care. It didn't matter. It did not matter what the biological parent did. That child wanted to be with that parent, period. And when I saw Austin running after the police car, after he saw what his mom did, it made me think about that. And it just made me think about just how powerful those connections are. And at the end of the day, a child wants their mom, their dad, or whoever their primary caregiver is, that's the person they want to be with. That's the person that they're attached to. And I just thought about little baby Austin, how is this going to affect him? And this is another added traumatic experience that he's going to have to work through and process. And, is he going to stop talking? I just had so many questions at the end of season 2, and just, thinking about him and thinking about Ginny, just something else she's going to have to carry and work through and, try to, maneuver just as a 16-year-old girl, as a child herself. She's just having to carry so much. She's completely being parentified, like I mentioned in my season 1 recap, where she's taking on the responsibilities of a parent or the responsibilities of an adult, where she really should just be focusing on being a child, being a teenager, and she's just left no room to do that. So those were some of my thoughts as that, moment was happening. Okay, y'all, that was my season 2 recap of Ginny and Georgia. Thanks for tuning in. Peace.